Have you ever been sitting at a family table, surrounded by food, voices, laughter, yet suddenly felt like you didn't belong there at all? What if, in the middle of a holiday meant for gratitude, someone you trusted took your arm and whispered words that made your heart freeze? Greater than, "My parents don't need you here. Just get out." Tonight's story begins at a Thanksgiving table, but it isn't about food. It's about dignity. It's about silence. And it's about what happened when an older woman realized has been quietly pushed out of her own family. This story is titled, "My Daughter-in-Law Pulled Me Away from the Thanksgiving Table. My Parents Don't Need You Here, and I." And before you hear the rest, I want you to pause for a moment. Because if you are a mother, a grandmother, or a woman who has spent her life keeping peace, this story may feel painfully familiar. Our guest tonight is a grandmother who never raised her, voice she never caused, scenes she believed that patience was strength and silence was grace. She came to that Thanksgiving dinner with nothing but good intentions. She dressed carefully. She brought a dish she had prepared with her own hands. She smiled through small discomforts, the kind many older women are taught to ignore. She never imagined that she would be physically pulled away from the table, not by a stranger. But by family. What happened next wasn't loud. There were no screams. No plates thrown. And that's what makes it more painful, because sometimes humiliation doesn't shout, it whispers. Tonight's story is not about revenge. It's not about winning arguments. It's about something deeper. It's about what it feels like to be erased slowly while still sitting right there. And if you're listening to this and thinking, why didn't she say anything? I want you to stay with us. Because many women don't speak up. Not because they are weak, but because they were taught to survive quietly. This grandmother didn't fight back that day. She didn't cause a scene. But what happened after she stood up from that table changed the way she saw herself forever. And maybe it will change the way you see yourself too. Here on Grandma Heartbroken Stories, we share voices that are often ignored. Stories that don't always end loudly, but end truthfully. This is a safe space for women who were told to stay quiet. For mothers who gave everything and expected nothing back. For grandmothers who learned, sometimes too late, that respect should never be optional. In the next part, you will hear directly from her. In her own words, she will tell you what that Thanksgiving day looked like from her seat at the table, what she noticed, and the exact moment she realized something was terribly wrong. And I'll warn you now, once you hear what she says next, you may never look at family gatherings the same way again. The grandmother begins her story. She'll take us back to that morning, before the dinner, before the words, before the hand grabbed her arm. And she'll tell you she almost didn't go at all.
I almost didn't go that day. That's the truth. When I woke up that morning, my body felt heavier than usual, not sick, just tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. The kind of tired that comes from years of trying to be agreeable, years of telling yourself that discomfort is normal, that you should be grateful just to be included. It was Thanksgiving, a day that's supposed to feel warm, safe, familiar. But something inside me felt uneasy. I stood in front of my closet for a long time, longer than necessary, touching fabrics I hadn't worn in years. I didn't want to look overdressed. I didn't want to look forgotten either. I chose something simple, neat, respectful. That's how I've always been. I was raised to believe that showing up quietly was a form of love. I cooked early that morning, a dish I had made for decades, the same one my son used to ask for when he was little. As I stirred the pot, I remembered him standing on a chair beside me, watching carefully, asking questions. Those memories softened me. They made me believe that going was the right thing. Family is family, I told myself. When I arrived, the house was already full. Cars lined the street. Laughter spilled out the front door before I even knocked. For a moment, I smiled. I thought maybe I had been wrong to feel nervous down inside. Everything looked beautiful. The table was long, perfectly set, dishes placed carefully, names written on little cards. I noticed there wasn't a card for me, but I didn't say anything. I never do. I took a seat at the end. People were polite. Not warm, just polite. Conversations flowed around me, not with me. I listened more than I spoke. That's always been my way. I didn't want to interrupt. I didn't want to be a burden. I told myself that this was fine. That this is how gatherings change as families grow. That older women step back so others can shine, but there were moments, small ones, that tugged at me. The way plates were passed over my hands, the way jokes paused when I tried to add something, the way my smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me still. I stayed quiet. I had learned long ago that silence keeps peace. Dinner was almost ready when she stood up. She moved around the table with purpose, checking dishes, straightening napkins. When she reached me, she leaned down and placed her hand on my arm. At first I thought it was kindness. She whispered my name. Her voice was calm. Can I talk to you for a second? She said. I didn't want to stand up. Something in her tone made my chest tighten. But everyone was watching. I didn't want to cause attention. So I nodded. She didn't walk beside me. She pulled me, not hard enough to make a scene, just enough to make it clear she was in control. Her fingers tightened around my arm as she guided me toward the hallway. Away from the table, away from the food, away from everyone. And that's when she said it. Not loudly. Not angrily, almost casually. My parents don't need you here, she said. Just get out. For a moment, I didn't understand the words. They didn't fit the setting. They didn't belong to a holiday table. I looked at her face, waiting for something, a smile, a sign that this was a misunderstanding. There was nothing, just impatience. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I wasn't angry. I was embarrassed, ashamed, like a child being scolded for something she didn't know she had done wrong. I glanced back toward the table. No one was looking at us. Or maybe they chose not to see. And in that moment, I realized something that hurt more than her words. I was alone in that house. I wish I could tell you. I stood up for myself then. But what happened next was quieter, and it hurt even more, because the way people react after silence revealed truths you can never forget. I didn't cry. That surprises people when they hear it. But it's true. Tears didn't come to me in that hallway. Not then. My body went still instead, as if it didn't know how to react to being dismissed so quietly. I nodded. I don't even remember deciding to nod. My head just moved on its own. Trained by years of avoiding conflict, she released my arm, not gently. Just done with me. I smoothed my sweater like nothing had happened. I walked back toward the table, past the smell of food, past the voices that had lowered slightly but didn't stop. No one asked where I had gone. No one asked if I was all right. I picked up my coat from the chair near the door. Someone laughed at a joke behind me. Plates clinked. The turkey was being carried in. I stood there for a moment, hoping foolishly that someone would notice. That my son would look up? That someone would say my name. No one did, so I opened the door and stepped outside. The air was cold, sharp. It hit my face harder than her words had. I stood on the porch, holding my purse, listening to the door close behind me. That sound stayed with me. The soft, final click of it. I walked to my car slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not because of my age, but because of what I was carrying inside. Confusion, humiliation, a kind of grief that didn't yet have a name. I sat in the driver's seat without turning the key. My hands rested in my lap. They were shaking. That's when it hit me. Not anger, sadness, a deep, hollow sadness that settled into my chest and refused to move. I thought about all the years I had tried to be easy to have around, all the times I bit my tongue, all the holidays I rearranged my plans so I wouldn't be in the way, all the love I gave without asking for space in return, and suddenly, I wondered something I had never allowed myself to ask before. Had I slowly taught them that I didn't matter? The drive home was quiet. No radio, no music. Just the sound of tires on the road and my own thoughts, looping again and again. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I sat in the dark, still wearing my coat, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. It was louder than usual. Or maybe I was just listening more closely. I replayed her words in my head. My parents don't need you here. Not we. Not today. Not please. Just, you don't belong that night. My son didn't call. Neither did anyone else. I ate leftovers alone at my kitchen table. The dish I had brought untouched in its container. I didn't feel hungry, but I ate anyway. Old habits are hard to break. When I finally went to bed, sleep didn't come easily. My mind wandered through memories I hadn't visited in years. Holidays when I was younger. When elders were given the first seat. The warm plate, the respect, somewhere along the way, that had changed. Or maybe it hadn't changed at all. Maybe I had. The next morning, my phone buzzed. A message from her. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an explanation. It was a single sentence, short, polite, empty. And when I read it, I realized something that would stay with me long after that. Day. The words spoken at the table were only the beginning, because what she wrote the next morning revealed something far more painful than being asked to leave. It revealed how long this had been happening without me noticing at all. Asterisk. The message stayed on my screen longer than it should have. I read it again and again, not because I didn't understand the words, but because I was trying to understand the feeling behind them. It was a misunderstanding. Let's move on. That was all it said. No apology, no concern, no acknowledgement of what had been done. Just a quiet request to forget. I set the phone down and stared at the wall. There was a time in my life when I would have done exactly that. Moved on, swallowed the ache. Told myself that peace mattered more than pride. But something inside me had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make ignoring it impossible. I thought about the way she had pulled my arm, about how carefully she chose her words so no one else would hear, about how easily the house had closed behind me, as if my presence had never been necessary in the first place. I realized then that this hadn't started that day. That day was just the moment it became visible. There had been signs, small ones I dismissed because they were easier to dismiss than to face the invitations. That arrived late. The plans that were already decided. When I was informed, the way my opinions were, acknowledged politely and then ignored. I had told myself it was normal. That families change. That younger voices take the lead, but respect doesn't disappear with age. Only attention does. Later that afternoon, my son finally called. His voice was careful, measured. He asked how I was feeling. He didn't ask what happened. I waited. I gave him space. He didn't fill it when I told him. There was a long pause on the line, long enough for me to hear his breathing change. She didn't mean it that way, he said finally. That sentence hurt more than I expected, not because he was defending her, but because he didn't ask me how it felt. I realized then that my silence had taught him something too, that I could absorb discomfort quietly, that I didn't need protecting. We ended the call. Politely, kindly, with all the words people use when they don't know how to fix what's broken. Afterward, I sat at my kitchen table and looked around the room. Everything in that house carried my fingerprints, my effort, my years, and yet, in someone else's home, I had been treated like an inconvenience. That night I did something I had never done before. I wrote, not a letter, not a message, just notes. Moments I remembered feeling small. Times I had chosen silence instead of truth. Occasions when I told myself, it's not worth it. The list surprised me. It was longer than I expected. As I wrote, I understood something important. Being quiet had kept things calm, but it had also kept me invisible. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The kind that comes after grief settles into acceptance. I wasn't angry. I was awake. I replied to her message with a single line. We don't move on from things that were never acknowledged. I didn't explain. I didn't accuse. I just stated a truth. The response came. Quickly. Too quickly. And when I read it, my hands went cold. Because instead of reflection, instead of understanding, there was irritation. And in that irritation, I saw something I hadn't seen clearly before. Control. The way she answered told me more than her words ever could. Because when someone feels challenged for the first time, they reveal who they've been all along, and what she revealed next made me realize this wasn't just about a dinner table anymore. Asterisk. Her reply was short, sharp, and strangely formal. I don't see why this needs to be discussed further. I read it once. Then again, not because it confused me, but because it confirmed something I had been afraid to admit. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a boundary. One, she believed she had the right to draw without my consent. I didn't answer right away. For the first time, I allowed myself time. I made tea. I sat by the window. I watched the leaves outside sway gently. Unaware of the quiet storm unfolding inside me, I thought about how often women my age are expected to disappear gracefully, to step aside, to accept decisions made for them. We are praised for being low maintenance, for not asking, for not needing. But no one warns you what happens when you become too easy to erase. Later that day, I received another message. This one wasn't from her. It was from my sister. She asked how Thanksgiving went. I hesitated. I could have brushed it off. I could have said fine, like I always do, but I didn't. I told her the truth. Not dramatically. Not angrily, just honestly. There was a long pause before she replied, and then she said, something that stayed with me. Why are you always the one who has to understand? I didn't have an answer because understanding had become my default. My shield. My excuse that evening. My son came by unexpectedly. He stood in the doorway, uncertain. Like a boy again, not quite sure where to place himself. He sat at the table where I'd eaten alone the night before. He apologized, not fully, not clearly, but enough to show discomfort. He said things like, "She was stressed and it wasn't meant to hurt you." I listened. I always do. Then I asked him something I had never asked before. "Do you believe I deserve to be treated that way?" He looked down. That silence answered me in that moment. I understood something painful but freeing. Love without respect becomes obligation, and I had been living in obligation for years. I told him I needed space. The word surprised us both. He nodded, though I could see he didn't know what it meant. Neither did I. Not yet, but I knew it was necessary after he left. I sat with the quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not empty, intentional. I began to notice things about myself I had ignored. How my shoulders relaxed when I wasn't bracing for someone's reaction. How my breathing slowed when I wasn't measuring my words. I wasn't losing my family. I was finding myself. The next few days passed without contact, no messages, no calls, and in that silence, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel lonely. I felt steady. Then a package arrived at my door. No note, no return address. Inside was the dish I had brought to Thanksgiving, untouched, wrapped carefully, sent back as if returning an item that didn't belong. My hands trembled as I closed the box because that gesture said more than words ever could. It told me exactly where I stood, and strangely enough, it also told me where I would no longer stand. What she sent back to me that day was meant to remind me of my place instead. It marked the moment I stopped accepting one that hurt me, and what I chose to do next changed the balance of everything. I didn't open the container again. I couldn't. Not because of what was inside, but because of what it represented. That dish had been a gesture of love, a habit formed over years of showing up, contributing, trying to belong. Sending it back felt like someone quietly saying, "We don't need what you bring." I set the box in the cupboard and closed the door. For the first time in days, I felt something close to anger, not loud, not explosive, but firm, solid. The kind of anger that doesn't rush you into words, but into decisions. I decided to stop explaining myself, not to them, not to anyone. The following week was uncomfortable. I kept reaching for my phone out of habit, expecting messages that didn't come. Old patterns don't break easily. They linger, waiting to be reactivated. But each time the phone stayed silent, I learned something new. I learned that peace doesn't always arrive with company. Sometimes it arrives with clarity. I began doing small things for myself. Walking in the mornings, cooking meals I enjoyed instead of what others preferred, sitting with my thoughts instead of pushing them away. I noticed how much of my life had been shaped around avoiding friction, how often I had made myself smaller so others could stay comfortable. One afternoon, I received a call from a relative who had heard something happened. The story had traveled as these things always do, but not truthfully. I was described as sensitive, dramatic, misunderstood. I didn't correct them. I didn't defend myself. I simply said, "I'm taking time for myself." That seemed to confuse them more than any argument could have, because women my age aren't expected to choose themselves. That realization stayed with me. Days later, my son reached out again. This time his tone was different, softer, less sure. He asked if we could talk. I agreed. We met in a neutral place, not his home, not mine. I wanted balance. He spoke first. He said he was caught in the middle, that he loved us both, that he didn't want conflict. I listened carefully. Then I told him something I had never said before. "I don't need you to choose." I said, "I need you to see." He asked me what I meant, so I told him calmly, clearly, how it felt to be removed from a table, how silence can wound, how years of accommodation can turn into invisibility. He didn't interrupt when I finished. He looked tired, not angry, not defensive, just tired. "I didn't realize," he said. I believed him, and yet, realizing something doesn't undo it. Before we parted, I set a boundary. Not harshly, not emotionally. Simply, "I won't put myself in situations where I am not respected," I said. "That includes holidays." The words felt heavy. "But right," he nodded. I don't know if he understood fully then, but I knew something important. I had said it out loud that night. I slept deeply for the first time in weeks, and when I woke up, there was a message waiting from her. It wasn't long, it wasn't kind, but it was honest. And honesty, even when sharp, has a way of revealing intentions, because what she finally admitted in that message made it clear this was never about a holiday. It was about control, and once control is challenged, nothing stays hidden for long. I read her message once, then placed the phone face down on the table. I didn't want to react. I wanted to understand. When I picked it up again, I read it more carefully, not for tone but for meaning. She didn't apologize. She didn't soften her words. She explained. Explained how difficult hosting had been. Explained how her parents felt. Explained how boundaries were important. But in all those explanations, there was no space for me. I wasn't part of the picture she was painting. I was an obstacle in it. I sat there for a long time, remembering other moments that suddenly made sense, the way decisions were announced instead of discussed, the way my presence was tolerated, not welcomed, the way my silence had been interpreted as consent. I realized something then, something that felt both painful and liberating. People don't change when you're easy to ignore. They change when your absence becomes noticeable. I didn't reply right away. That alone seemed to shift something, because another message came. Then another. Each one slightly sharper than the last. Accusations began to appear, carefully worded, but clear, that I was making things difficult, that I was overreacting, that I was creating distance. It amazed me how quickly hurt turned into blame. I recognized the pattern, though I hadn't named it before. When someone is used to being accommodated, your boundaries feel like an attack. I responded only once. I'm not asking for permission, I wrote. I'm asking for respect. There was no reply. Days passed, and in that time, something strange happened. I felt lighter. I started reconnecting with parts of myself. I had neglected friends I hadn't called, hobbies I had set aside. I laughed more. I slept better. Distance gave me perspective. I could finally see the relationship without the fog of obligation. One afternoon, my son stopped by again, this time unannounced. He looked unsettled. She's upset, he said. I nodded. I know, I replied. He waited, as if expecting me to fix it, and for the first time, I'm not responsible for her feelings, I said gently. I'm responsible for how I allow myself to be treated. He looked at me, really looked, perhaps seeing me differently for the first time. There was a pause, a long one. Then he said something I never expected. I think we've been unfair to you. The words didn't erase the past, but they mattered, not because they healed everything, but because they acknowledged it before he left. He asked if I would come to Christmas. I didn't answer immediately. I asked him a question instead. Will I be welcomed? I said, or just tolerated? He didn't know. That told me enough. I told him I would decide later. After he left, I stood by the window again, watching the world move on without noticing my quiet revolution. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was learning how to choose myself, and that choice, once made, tends to demand consistency, because the moment you bend again, everything returns to the way it was. What happened next surprised all of us, because when I finally made my decision about Christmas, it didn't just change my plans, it changed the entire family dynamic. I made my decision quietly, no announcement, no explanation. When Christmas came, I stayed home. I didn't decorate the way I used to. I didn't cook a feast for people who wouldn't be there. Instead, I made myself a simple meal and lit a single candle on the table. It wasn't sad, it was peaceful. That surprised me. I had expected loneliness, regret, the familiar ache of absence, but what I felt was something else entirely. A calm I hadn't known in years. I spent the day moving, slowly reading, resting, letting memories come and go without fighting them. I thought about past holidays, about the effort I had poured into making everything perfect for everyone else, and I wondered when I had stopped making space for myself. In the afternoon, my phone rang. It was my son. His voice sounded uncertain, like he wasn't sure what response he would get. I didn't think you were serious, he said. I was, I replied. There was a pause. The house feels different, he admitted. I didn't ask how. I already knew when someone who has always absorbed the discomfort steps away. The imbalance becomes obvious. Later that evening, there was a knock at my door, unexpected. I wasn't expecting anyone when I opened it. I found her standing there, no coat, no smile. She looked tired for a moment. Neither of us spoke. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. She looked around the room, as if seeing it for the first time. This wasn't how I thought today would go, she said. I nodded. Me neither, I replied. She sat down, not comfortably, not confidently. She spoke carefully. As if testing each word, she said she felt judged, that she felt unsupported, that she had been overwhelmed. I listened. I didn't interrupt when she finished. She looked at me, expectantly, waiting for reassurance, for forgiveness, for me to make it better instead. I asked her something simple. Did you ever consider how it felt to be asked to leave? Her face changed, not defensively, but slowly, as if the question hadn't occurred to her before. She didn't answer right away. I didn't think it was that serious, she said. Finally, and there it was. The truth we had been circling, I told her calmly. Without anger, that dignity isn't measured by volume. That being quiet doesn't mean being unaffected. That asking someone to leave a table is never small. She listened, or at least she didn't interrupt before she left. She said something that surprised me. I don't know how to fix this. I told her something I had learned the hard way. You don't fix it by controlling it. I said, you fix it by acknowledging it. She nodded. Though I wasn't sure what she truly understood, after she left, I sat alone again. But this time, I felt something new. Not victory. Not relief. Closure. Or at least the beginning of it. I thought that conversation would be the end. But I was wrong. Because sometimes, when control slips, people try to regain it in unexpected ways. And what happened next is at every boundary. I had just learned to set asterisk after she left that night. I sat with the quiet longer than usual, not because I was unsettled, but because I was listening to my own thoughts without rushing to soften them. The next few days were calm on the surface. No messages, no visits, no tension spilling over. But calm, I learned, can sometimes be the space before resistance. It started with small things. A message in a family group chat about upcoming plans already decided, already scheduled, already excluding me without saying so directly. I noticed it. But I didn't react. Then came a phone call from a distant relative asking why I was keeping my distance. I didn't explain. I simply said I was doing what felt healthy. That answer seemed to travel faster than I expected. Because not long after my son called again, this time, his voice carried frustration. She feels like you're shutting her out, he said. I took a breath before answering. I'm not shutting anyone out, I replied. I'm stepping back. He didn't see the difference. Most people don't, especially when they've benefited from your availability. We spoke for a while, carefully, gently, but there was an undercurrent. Now tension where there used to be. Avoidance. He asked what I wanted. The question caught me off guard. I had spent so many years adjusting to what others wanted that I hadn't practiced. Answering it, I want to be treated with respect, I said, and I want my presence to be a choice, not an obligation. He was quiet. That quiet felt different from before. Less defensive. More thoughtful. But change doesn't happen in a straight line. A week later, another invitation arrived. This one was formal, polite, careful. A family gathering, no apology attached. No acknowledgement of what had happened, just an expectation. I sat with that invitation for a long time. I thought about how easy it would be to smooth things over, to pretend nothing had changed, but I also thought about how hard it had been to leave that table, and I realized something important. Returning without change would teach them that boundaries are temporary. I declined. Simply, kindly. Without explanation. That choice caused ripples, questions, assumptions, whispers. I felt them, but they no longer controlled me. One afternoon, my son stopped by again. He looked tired, worn down by tension he hadn't expected to carry. I don't know how to make everyone happy, he said. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a man trying to balance. Without tools, I don't need you to make everyone happy. I told him, I need you to understand that I won't disappear quietly anymore. He nodded slowly. I'm trying, he said. I believed him, but trying, I had learned, doesn't always mean changing. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. Another message from her. This one was different. Not defensive, not explanatory. Direct. If we talk again, it read. It needs to be clear that things won't be like before. Smiled softly when I read it because she was right. Things wouldn't be like before, but not in the way she thought. That message marked a turning point because when someone finally admits that the past won't return, you get to decide what replaces it. And the choice I made next forced everyone to face a truth they'd been avoiding for years. When I read her message, I didn't feel threatened. I felt clear for the first time. The rules weren't being written without me. If we talk again, things won't be like before. I agreed with her, just not for the same reasons. I replied a day later, not immediately. I wanted my words to come from certainty, not reaction. I understand, I wrote, and I agree. That was all. She didn't answer right away. That silence told me she had expected resistance, explanations, negotiation. Instead, she got acceptance. Not submission, acceptance. We met a few days later. Not at her house. Not at mine. Neutral ground again. She arrived composed, almost rehearsed. She spoke first, explaining expectations, schedules, boundaries, all delivered carefully, as if laying out terms. I listened. Then, when she paused, I spoke. I won't attend gatherings where I'm not welcomed, I said. I won't accept being dismissed quietly, and I won't pretend things didn't happen. She looked surprised, not offended, surprised. Perhaps because I wasn't emotional. I wasn't pleading. I was calm. That kind of calm unsettles people more than anger ever could. She asked if that meant I wouldn't come around anymore. I'll come where there's respect, I replied. Nothing more, nothing less. We sat with that dot. The conversation ended politely, carefully, but something had shifted. Weeks passed, contact became limited, but honest. No forced invitations, no assumptions. And with that space, I noticed something unexpected. I was no longer anxious before family interactions, because they were no longer guaranteed. They were earned one afternoon. My son called, his tone was lighter. We're trying something different, he said. He explained they were adjusting how gatherings were planned, including conversations being more intentional. I didn't rush to praise. I waited because change reveals itself through consistency, not promises. Then came the real test. Another holiday approached. This time the invitation arrived early, personally. From my son, he didn't assume. He asked, "You'd be welcome," he said, "but only if you want to be." I sat with that for a long time. I imagined the table, the faces, the history. And I asked myself an honest question. Was I ready, not to forgive, but to participate without shrinking? I said yes. On one condition, that if I felt uncomfortable, I would leave without explanation. He agreed. The day arrived, I walked into that house differently. Not cautiously, not apologetically. I took my place, and for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. She was polite, controlled but respectful. That was enough. Not reconciliation, recognition as I left that night. She said something quietly. "I didn't realize how much you were holding." I nodded. "I didn't either," I replied. I thought that moment meant resolution. But boundaries don't end conflict. They reveal whether respect can survive without control. And what happened next showed me how fragile that balance truly was. Asterisk. That sense of balance didn't last as long as I hoped, not because anyone did anything wrong right away, but because old habits don't disappear quietly. They wait, they test, they look for cracks. At first, everything felt careful. Conversations were polite. Invitations were thoughtful. I noticed effort, and I acknowledged it silently. I didn't want to punish anyone. I wanted peace. Real peace. Not the kind that comes from pretending. But then came the small moments again. A suggestion made without asking. A plan mentioned as if it were already agreed upon. A look exchanged across the room when I spoke. Nothing dramatic, but I had learned to listen to patterns, not incidents. One afternoon, my son mentioned a future holiday in passing. "We'll probably do it at her parents' place," he said casually. "It's easier for everyone." The old version of me would have nodded. This version asked a question. Was that already decided? He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "I just want to be included in the conversation," I said gently, not informed afterward. He apologized again, but apologies, I was learning, only matter when followed by change. I went home that evening feeling thoughtful, not upset. And that's when it struck me. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being excluded, not of upsetting anyone because I had already survived the worst part. Realizing I was optional to people I had made central, that awareness, painful as it was, had freed me. Days later, she reached out again. This time, her message was careful, measured. She asked if we could talk, not about events, but about expectations. That alone told me something had shifted. We met again. She admitted she felt challenged, that my boundaries made her feel uncertain about her place. I listened, then I said something that surprised even me. "Respect isn't a competition," I told her. "There's room for both of us." She didn't respond immediately. She asked me why I had stayed quiet for so long. I answered honestly. "Because I thought silence kept love intact," I said. "But silence only protects comfort, not connection." That landed. I could see it, not dramatically, but genuinely. After that conversation, things changed slowly. Not perfectly, but intentionally. I was asked, not told, included, not assumed, heard, even when my answer wasn't convenient. And I learned something important. Boundaries don't push people away. They show who's willing to meet you where you stand. I began to trust myself more, to speak earlier, to leave sooner, to stop explaining what should already be understood. One evening, while clearing my kitchen, I found the container she had sent back weeks ago. I washed it, not because I needed to, but because I was done carrying that moment with me. I realized then that forgiveness isn't about returning to the table. It's about choosing how you sit. When you do, I thought that was the lesson, that boundaries were enough. But life has a way of testing what we believe, especially when we're tired. And the test that came next asked more of me than I was prepared for. Asterisk. The test didn't arrive loudly. It came disguised as concern. A phone call early in the morning from my son. His voice sounded strained, not panicked, but uneasy in a way that told me something was already unfolding. "She's overwhelmed," he said, "with work, the kids, everything." I listened without interrupting. He wasn't asking yet. He was preparing. Then came the pause. The familiar pause. The one that usually meant someone needed something from me. "She was wondering," he continued, carefully, "if you could help more just for a while." Years ago, I would have said yes before he finished the sentence. I would have rearranged my life quietly, convincing myself that being needed was the same as being valued. But I had learned something since then. Being needed without respect is another form of erasure. I asked a simple question. "What does help look like?" He explained. "More visits, more flexibility, more availability, more understanding." I noticed what wasn't mentioned. No conversation about my time, no discussion about boundaries, no acknowledgement of what had changed. It felt like a return to old expectations, gently packaged, carefully worded. "I need to think about it," I said. That answer surprised him. He wasn't used to me pausing that day. I sat with the request longer than I wanted to, because part of me still wanted to be useful, still wanted to prove that I mattered. But another part, stronger now, asked a different question. Would this help be appreciated or assumed? That evening she called, not defensive, not cold, almost friendly. She thanked me in advance. That told me everything. She had already decided I didn't correct her right away. Instead, I told her what I could offer and what I couldn't. I could help sometimes. I could show up with notice. I could be involved without being responsible. There was silence on the line. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I thought things were better now." "They are," I replied. "But better doesn't mean the same." That distinction mattered, because improvement doesn't erase history, it learns from it. She sounded disappointed, not angry. Disappointed, and I realized then that disappointment is often the reaction when expectations go unmet, especially unspoken ones. After the call, doubt crept in. Was I being selfish, too rigid, unforgiving? Those questions haunted me for days, but every time I considered giving in, my body responded first. Tight shoulders, shallow breath, that old familiar tension. My body remembered what my mind tried to forget. I declined the extra responsibility. Kindly, clearly. The response was polite, but distant, and that distance told me something important. Some relationships only function when you give more than you receive. Letting go of that role will always feel uncomfortable, especially to those who benefited from it. I grieved quietly. Not the loss of connection, but the loss of illusion. The illusion that being endlessly available would guarantee belonging. I thought setting limits would finally settle things. But what I learned next was harder to accept. Because sometimes when you stop giving what people expect, they show you exactly what they valued you for in the first place. The distance didn't announce itself. It settled in quietly. Messages became shorter. Calls less frequent. Invitations came with conditions, if they came at all. Nothing was said directly, but everything was felt. And that's when it became clear to me. I hadn't lost them. I lost my usefulness. That realization hurt in a way I hadn't expected. Not sharply, but deeply. Like discovering a crack in something you believed was solid. I replayed years in my mind. The babysitting at short notice, the meals prepared and dropped off without thanks, the listening, the absorbing, the forgiving, and I wondered how much of that had been love, and how much had been convenience. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend at the market. We hadn't spoken in years. She asked how my family was, and for the first time, I didn't give the easy answer. I told her the truth. She listened quietly, then said something simple. "Peace shouldn't cost you your place." That stayed with me because I realized how often women are taught to trade their presence for peace, to accept discomfort so others don't have to feel it. I stopped reaching out after that, not out of anger, out of honesty, and something surprising happened. I felt lighter. I filled my days differently. I joined a small community group. I spent more time with people who asked how I was and waited for the answer. I laughed more freely then. Weeks later, my son showed up again. No warning. He looked tired. Not frustrated. Reflective. "We miss you," he said. I nodded. "I know." He waited for more. I didn't give it. He admitted things felt harder without me stepping in. That tensions had increased. That help was needed, and there it was again. The familiar pattern. I looked at him and said something. That had taken me a lifetime to learn. I don't exist to make things easier for everyone else. He didn't argue. Instead, he asked a question that surprised me. "What do you want now?" I thought carefully. "I want relationships where I'm chosen," I said, "not assigned." He nodded slowly, and for the first time, I saw something shift in him, not guilt, understanding before he left. He asked if I would come by sometime, no expectations attached. I agreed, not because I felt obligated, but because I felt safe when I visited. Things were different, not perfect, but honest. No demands, no assumptions, just conversation. As I left that day, she thanked me genuinely this time. And I realized something important. Change doesn't come from endurance. It comes from clarity. I thought this was the balance I had been searching for, but life had one more lesson. Waiting. Because sometimes, true healing isn't tested in conflict. It's tested in forgiveness and the choice of how close you allow people to stand again. Asterisk. Forgiveness is a word people use lightly. They talk about it as if it's a switch you flip. Something you do once and everything feels better afterward. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process, and it doesn't always look the way others expect. After that visit, after the quiet thank you and the absence of pressure, I felt something soften inside me. Not completely, but enough to breathe more freely. I wasn't guarding myself the way I had been. I wasn't bracing for disappointment. Still, I was careful because trust, once fractured, doesn't return all at once. Weeks passed, contact remained steady but measured. I noticed something different in myself. I was no longer scanning conversations for hidden expectations. I wasn't anticipating the moment I'd be needed or asked to step in. I was present. One afternoon, she called me directly. No message first. No preparation, just a call. She said she wanted to talk not about plans, not about help, but about us. I agreed. We sat together quietly, just the two of us. She spoke slowly, thoughtfully. She told me she hadn't realized how much space I had given without being asked, how she had mistaken my silence for comfort, how control had felt easier than vulnerability. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to reassure her when she finished. I told her something honest. I don't need to be central, I said, but I need to be respected. She nodded. And this time, I believed her not because of her words, but because of her posture, her stillness, her willingness to sit with discomfort that mattered. After that conversation, something changed again. Not dramatically, but genuinely. I was invited, not expected, included, not managed, asked, not assumed, and more importantly, I learned how to say no without fear. That might sound small, but for someone who spent decades believing love meant availability, it was everything. I still see my family, I still show up, but differently now. I leave when I'm tired. I speak when something feels wrong. I don't stay quiet to preserve appearances. And the strange thing is, the world didn't collapse out the relationships that could adjust. Did the ones that couldn't? Revealed themselves, and that clarity gave me peace. Sometimes, I think back to that Thanksgiving table. The moment my arm was pulled. The words spoken so casually, and I realize now that moment didn't break me. It woke me. It showed me the cost of silence. It reminded me that dignity isn't something you ask for, it's something you protect. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not resentful. I'm aware. And awareness is powerful, because when you know your worth, you don't argue for a seat at the table. You choose where and whether you sit at all. What I've shared isn't just my story, it's a reflection of so many women who stayed quiet for too long. And before this ends, there's something important that still needs to be said, not by me, but by the woman who's been listening beside me the entire time.
As you listen to her story, there's one thing I hope stayed with you. This was never just about Thanksgiving. It was about being seen. So many women, especially mothers and grandmothers, are taught to stay quiet for the sake of peace. To give more, wait longer, and ask for less. Until one day, they realize they've been standing at the edge of their own lives. What she showed us tonight is something powerful. That dignity doesn't come from being needed. It comes from being respected. And boundaries are not punishments. They are invitations to meet us where we finally stand. If this story touched something inside you, if it reminded you of moments you stayed silent, or times you felt slowly pushed aside, you're not alone. This space exists for you. Please take a moment to, like this episode, subscribe to Grandma Heartbroken Stories. Share your thoughts or your own story in the comments. Your voice matters. Your experiences matter. And sometimes, healing begins the moment we say, I deserve a seat, or I will choose my own table. Thank you for listening. We'll be here again.